welcome, from our Child and Family Data Archive project to all the people who are attending the session. We've really, it's great. We pretty much reviewed all the applications, and so it's nice to see the people here after all that work. And also, one of the things I wanted to, reflect on is we were really struck by the interest in this workshop. This is kind of a first time we're doing a workshop like this of this nature, where we're bridging across different data archives and projects and focusing specifically on Indigenous populations. And we were really struck by the interest and hope that not only is this workshop helpful, but that it's also, the interest is driving more and more resources that can be pulled together and future resources for the research community. It was, anyway, so we're glad, it was a really hard workshop to organize and to try to get it as right as we could. And we're really glad we did it, because there's really a lot of interest in these topics. So thank you to our presenters, and thank you to the participants for being involved in the workshop.
Yeah, and we have great chats coming in. It's really nice to read where you're all coming from. Definitely appreciate that. We have people from all over. This is awesome. From institutions that we've worked with, like Johns Hopkins and University of Colorado, the Ann Schultz Medical Campus, which is where Michelle's institution, Michigan State University. We also have people who are completely new to us from lots of different places. So Clemson University, this is super exciting. Thanks to everybody. You see any connections, Sarah?
No, I just, like Michelle's plug for her listserv. I would endorse.
The Native Children's Research Exchange is amazing, and Michelle does such a fabulous job with supporting that, and Nancy, also Nancy Whitesell, who's one of the authors of that evaluation framework that I shared before. It's just a great group if you're interested in support. All right,
should I go ahead and share our slides for the next section? Now, everyone will have to tell me, can you see just my slides?
Just your slides.
Excellent. Okay. So Susan set us up very nicely. We're framing this next segment of our morning as a case study. So looking at the American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey. I probably will never say that string of words again. We just call it AIAN FACES, and we only have so much time. So an agenda for this part of the workshop, I'm going to do a pretty quick introduction to the study and the data set, background and context, the design process, and just really high level information about the study. Then Jessica will talk a bit about partnering with community partners, specifically in terms of thinking about AIAN FACES data. And then I will give a little update about some upcoming study plans and resources that are already out there for you to access. And then we will break for lunch, or just have a break depending where you are. So just a quick note about the AIAN FACES datasets. Right now, the only data set that is available to apply for is the AIAN FACES 2015 data. So you could go on the Child and Family Data Archive and take a look at that and apply in your free time after the workshop. But the AIAN FACES 2019 data will be out very soon, this fall. And I'm going to focus on the 2019 data. Mostly it's the same design as 2015, so everything I say here about 2019 would apply to 2015. The one big difference is that AIAN FACES 2019 tried to collect data in spring 2020, and so we were only able to collect partial data for our direct child assessment and classroom observation. We started data collection at the beginning of March, and as you might assume, about 2 weeks into March, we had to stop in-person data collection. And then we're really excited that we're going to hopefully be collecting data again this fall and next spring, pending OMB approval, to understand where children and families and Head Start staff are 18 months into the pandemic. And that data will also be archived for secondary use. Okay. So I guess I didn't introduce myself. I'm Sara Bernstein. I'm at Mathematica, and I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. right now, standing in Washington, D.C. I really appreciate the opportunity to share today on behalf of our study partners at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Administration for Children and Families of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and our partners at the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center, including Jessica and Michelle. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous contribution of our AIAN FACES work group, whose members provided guidance on the study, and I will describe that work group in a bit more detail in a few moments. And most importantly, I wanted to acknowledge the 22 Region 11 programs who participated in AIAN FACES in 2019. In particular, they saw the value of continuing to participate in this study during the COVID pandemic, as that started to sweep the country and to really devastate Native communities disproportionately. So we really are deeply grateful for those 22 programs and communities. Okay, so for over 50 years, Head Start has provided child development and family support services. The program started in 1965 as part of the War on Poverty, and since then has served nearly 30 million children and families. And that support comes through a number of different services, so educational services, but also nutritional services, social, emotional, and family support services, and support for children and families' cultural and language experiences. Michelle touched on a bit of this before, but as part of its management of Head Start, the federal government divides Head Start into 12 regions. 10 of those 12 are geographically defined, and the other 2 are defined by the populations they serve. So Region 11 serves children and families in programs that are operated by federally recognized AIAN tribes. It includes about 145 Head Start programs in 26 states across the country. You can see those in the red shading on the map. And Region 11 serves approximately 20,000 preschool children. The majority of children in Region 11 are American Indian or Alaska Natives. You can see that in the pie chart, but a small percentage, or 15%, are actually not. Okay. So AIAN FACES was carried out for the first time in 2015, and AIAN FACES 2019 builds on the success of that study. Relying on the expertise of the work group, which again, I'll talk about in just a moment, AIAN FACES successfully recruited 22 Region 11 programs to participate in the study following each community's review process, and gathered data to help answer high priority questions identified by the work group. Because the 2019 study was designed to be similar to 2015, it provides not only the most current nationally representative data on Region 11, but also has the possibility of looking at trends over time now that we have 2 rounds of data. More information about the studies can be found on ACF's website, which we'll link to at the end of the presentation, or you can just Google OPRE AIAN FACES, and that should take you to the right place, probably easier than the link. But I'm going to briefly describe our work group. So the AIAN FACES work group is comprised of members from the 4 groups you see here: Region 11 Head Start program directors, university-based researchers like Jessica and Michelle, ACF federal staff, and researchers at Mathematica. The work group was formed in 2013. Again, Michelle spoke briefly about this earlier, to advise on what the 2015 study would be about, how it would be conducted, and how the findings would be shared. And then again, building on that foundation, there is a 2019 work group that is advising on updates to the measures, or did advise on updates to the 2019-2020 measures, and it is advising again for our next round. also gave us advice on data collection, training procedures, and priorities for sharing findings. Okay, so let's turn to some key features just so you have kind of the structure before Jessica goes into this sort of case study example. So AIAN FACES, again, is designed to be representative of all children served by Region 11. So both those who are American Indian Alaska Native and those who are not, even though, again, that's just 15% of children in Region 11. The study has several goals. So to describe the strengths and needs of all children in Region 11, to provide an accurate picture of all children and families served by Region 11, and also to understand the cultural and linguistic experiences of Native children and families. So to achieve a nationally representative sample of Region 11 as a whole, 22 randomly selected programs were recruited to participate in the 2019 study. For each program, we followed each tribe or village's review process to get information, to conduct study activities, and to archive the data for qualified secondary users, like hopefully some of you. We collected data from children based on direct child assessments, from parents, as well as teachers who reported on individual study children, as well as on their classrooms. We also collected data from center directors and program directors. And as you can see from our pyramid here, our sample size goals were these 22 programs, within them 40 centers, 85 classrooms, and 720 children and their parents. So during the program year, some data were collected during fall and spring, while other data were collected only during spring. As I mentioned before, COVID-19 disrupted some of our data collection plans, and I'll talk about this as I go through the next few slides. So in fall and spring, children's cognitive skills in language, literacy, mathematics, and executive function, as well as their physical development, were directly assessed. As you can see from the table note, we weren't able to collect those direct assessments completely in spring 2020, but that data that we did collect is available as a supplemental partial sample file, I think we're calling it, that you can also apply for. But that data can't be used to make like representative statements about Region 11. It's just the 7 programs where we collected data. But it still has, I'm sure, value for many secondary users. So teachers also reported on individual children's social emotional skills, and parents completed surveys about their family, home life, and community. Then in the spring of the program year, teachers and directors completed surveys about themselves and the classroom and program practices. So for example, the Native culture and language resources and experiences that children had in the classrooms and programs. Again, classrooms in 7 programs were also observed for quality and children's Native culture and language experiences. We used the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale Revised, or ECRS-R, and the Pre-K Classroom Assessment Scoring System, or Pre-K Class. In addition, observers completed a set of questions about children's exposure to Native language and a variety of cultural items in the classroom. That observation data is also available on the partial sample file. To capture the pandemic's impact on Region 11 programs and centers, AIAN FACES 2019 included specific questions on the spring 2020 surveys related to how programs and centers adjusted their services and communications with families and staff during the pandemic. As you can see on the slide, program directors reported on program closures, their ability to contact and provide services to families, enrollment during this period, staff experiences, and supplemental summer program funding through the CARES Act. And then center directors reported on family and staff experiences, closures at the center level, their center's operating capacity and hours, and needs and services. So in both fall and spring, children participated in a 60-minute one-on-one direct child assessment conducted by our trained field staff. Assessors used a web-based instrument on a tablet computer. Questions were displayed on their computer, and then a second monitor displayed images for the child. Again, we collected only the partial data in spring 2020, but data for the full sample in fall 2019. In both the fall and spring, teachers had the option of completing a 10-minute teacher-child report, or TCR, as you might hear me refer to it, either online or via a paper instrument. And then in the fall and spring, parents could complete their survey either online or on the phone, and it took about 30 minutes. Okay. So the 4 instruments listed in this table were administered in spring 2020 only. The 35-minute teacher survey, like the TCR, could be done online or on paper. In the 7 programs where we did conduct classroom observations, classrooms were observed for about 4 hours, typically in the morning, by trained classroom observers. And program and center directors had the option of responding to a 30-minute survey online or using a paper instrument. So that's a really high-level overview of the study and the data we collected in 2019-2020. I'll pause for a moment. I haven't been monitoring the chat, but just to see if anybody has any questions. It doesn't look like there are questions. If anybody does have any questions, you can chat them now, or otherwise I will turn it over to Jessica.
I see, Sarah, there's a question about whether this was the same for 2015, I think.
Yeah, so all the data collection components were the same. The study goals were the same. Again, the only difference here is that we weren't able to complete all aspects of the data collection in the spring because of the pandemic.
Nancy asked about the parent surveys in 2020, if those were disrupted as well.
They were not disrupted. You will see in the 2019 users manual when it comes out, we did do some analyses to see sort of if respondents at different periods of time looked differently, right? Because like some parents that ended up responded to the survey, you know, in late February, actually. So before, I think it was clear to many of us just the kind of disruption that would happen because of the pandemic. Most parents, I believe, actually responded before mid-March, but some responded after. And so we looked at if there were differences in various characteristics of parents depending on when they responded. And now I'm not going to remember the results. I think we did find some differences, but they were typically fewer in number than you would expect just due to chance, given the number of characteristics we were looking at. But that will be written up in the documentation.
And when they completed it after mid-March, it was just after mid-March, right? Or was it much later than after mid-March?
So we didn't close our data collection until the middle of July, because those COVID-related questions I was talking about in the director surveys, they weren't in our original director surveys because we had worked on designing those like over a year prior, right? And so we didn't roll out those questions until June. So all of the study instruments stayed open until July. But you have kind of diminishing returns in terms of response rates, right? So like your biggest bump is pretty early and then it kind of trickles. So I don't think it's many parents later in that period, and in our documentation and in our technical reports, which I'll talk about a little later, we have tables showing each instrument and what month we had, you know, what percentage was completed in each month.
Thanks. And then Jessica also asked, were the 2015 data collected across the 2 semesters or only in spring, similar to 2019?
Yeah, so in 2015, 2016, we had the same fall spring set up with the same instruments at the same time. Yep.
Right. And schedule was exactly the same, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thanks.
All right.
Any other questions? Those are some good ones. I have a feeling some of those people are going to want to talk to you, Sarah, further.
I'm pulling up my users. I need to pull up both users manuals, so I'm ready because I don't have them, those hundreds of pages long documents committed completely to memory.
I know, right? Why do you not?
Yeah, right. Feels like I should.
You're right. No, you should not. I guess I can go ahead and get started then. If there are other questions, just stop me. I'm fine with just stopping. So how do you find community partners appropriate for AIAN FACES data? So now I'm going to take a lot of what I talked about before and apply it specifically for this data set for AIAN FACES. And so you can, next slide, you're going to hear me say next slide a lot. So since I'm in the middle of this presentation. So when you're identifying potential partners, which is the first part of this, right? So I can see all of you right now since I'm not sharing a presentation. Use your reaction buttons. There's a yes and a no button down there. Tell me if you already have a community partner, meaning someone actually in, of course, if you are a community member, then that is important, but I'm talking about like someone who would represent a Head Start program who you could consider as a partner in your work. So if you could use the yes button if you do have someone, and a no button if you do not, meaning, even if you're not sure yet. And I can see those popping up on the screen. Thank you. So we have a real mix. We have people here we have a few people here who do already have partners, but we have a lot of people here who also don't. And that's fine. And that's totally okay. We expect people coming in a range of different places. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. I think for the yes, no buttons, I'm not sure if they go down on their own. I think you might actually have to remove them, unlike the other reaction buttons that just go away at some point. So, so if you're looking to identify potential partners, there's a little bit of literature actually about how you do this. It's not a lot, but there's a little bit. So 3 kind of main points are who's working on the issue, whose daily life is influenced by this issue, and who has resources that can be used to address this issue. So we keep moving this, using this kind of in our own work. So within AIAN FACES in our work group, we have people who represent all of these, who are kind of fit in all these boxes. We also do within the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center. So people working on the issue might be researchers, they might be practitioners, they might be training and technical assistance people. The people whose daily life is influenced by this issue are obviously our Head Start directors and program administrators and teachers and parents. And then the people who have the resources that could be used to address this issue are collaborators from ACF, particularly OPRE and also Office of Head Start, have been really, really involved in this work. And so those are people who have resources that could be used to address this issue, right? So that's important. So next slide, please. So those are the kind of people that you want to be able to include on your team. So how do you find a partner? There are some here on this list that are better than other of these suggestions, but look, ask, attend, volunteer, act. I don't say advertise, I cross it off the list. It's technically in the literature when you look it up, but I think it's a terrible way to do it. And search. I really think search is not very good, but it's not as bad as advertise. But really, looking around for organizations, asking other people, like those of us on the call today are happy to make connections and introductions for people to begin these partnerships. Volunteering, attending community meetings and volunteering in the community are super important. I like to tell the story of how many times I've been at community meetings where I am there to begin to build our relationship with each other, and how often I end up doing things like moving chairs around the table or, moving food from one place to another. I'm just there to help, right? So being there in that helper role, volunteering is really, it seems like it's not important, but it's so important when you're beginning these relationships. So after you find a partner, then making sure that you continue in that role. So again, you can find a partner by volunteering. You also continue in that role of volunteering. Next slide, please. So again, reach out when you first reach out to potential partners. I said this in the last presentation. listen first. Reach out and listen. You want to go in with this perspective that you were there to hear from them, not to tell them all about you and your research and how good of a researcher you are, because that's not the right approach. You're gonna, it's not gonna move you forward in your partnership. Next slide, please. There's a document that I really like to pass around to everyone, and again, I'll put this in the chat, but Pasek et al. From 2010, page 10 actually has this list of questions to expect your potential community partner to ask you. And one of the questions, or two of the questions that I love the most, are being prepared to answer questions about who you are as a human being, not as a researcher, but as a human being. And what are your motivations for doing this work with this community? So why are you here? Why is this issue important to you? And why is exploring this issue within this community important to you? And if the community partner doesn't ask you those questions, I encourage you to begin to share those things with the community partner. Next slide, please. So how do you partner with community? So once you have a partner, right, and you begin this work, how do you partner together to contextualize the data and specific to this data set, contextualize the AIAN FACES data? Next slide, please. I love this quote by Bell Hooks. One of our colleagues, Meryl Brofsky from OPRE, shared this in one of our presentations that we did, I don't know, sometime during the pandemic, which is all blending together for me. But no need to hear your voice when I can talk about you better than you can speak about yourself. No need to hear your voice. Only tell me about your pain. I want to know your story. And then I will tell it back to you in a new way. Tell it back to you in such a way that it has become mine, my own. Rewriting you, I write myself anew. I am still author, authority. I'm still colonizer, the speaking subject, and you are now at the center of my talk. I just think it's a really powerful way to kind of center how we talk about AIAN FACES data and the importance of involving our community partners in telling these stories of the data. Next slide, please. So at the heart of this, I've already said this twice before, I told you I'd say it again, relationships are critical. Here are two of our wonderful community partners. They're both directors of Head Start programs, wonderful Head Start programs, tribal Head Start programs. And here they are. We were doing an activity where people were identifying the constructs that they thought would be particularly important to support children's social emotional development from AIAN FACES 2015 data. And here they are having a lot of fun with this data activity. And we can do this kind of work right now where we're looking at things like data variables and mapping them onto constructs, which sounds super not awesome for a community partner to do, but we can do that because we have these relationships. They're critical. Next slide, please. So your goal is that you're building a team. You're working together as a team, not as one person leading a group to be able to do something, but a team who's going to collaborate on doing something very important for the communities that you are working within or working with. Next slide, please. Some tips for how you document your agreements. I talked about the agreements before. This is just a quick kind of check-in. We already talked about these things, but a few kind of key pieces. What are your goals? How do you work together? How often are you going to meet? We talked about what are your roles. I can't emphasize that enough. It's super important to talk about your roles and what products will you produce. So with AIAN FACES, one of the things that we did for some of the work was we developed these small teams. Who wants to look at, we'd say, who wants to look at these data? And some data that we're going to talk about in a moment are data around native language and culture use at home and in the community and in the classroom. We said, okay, who's interested in looking at data on AIAN FACES from 2015 on native language and culture in the classroom? And who's interested in looking at data on native language and culture at home and in the community? And we broke into these small teams and we prepared reports, community reports, to tell the story of what those data meant. We'll go over that in a minute. but we had to define the roles. And usually we have a researcher and a community partner kind of co-lead the work to make sure that the voice is there, that there's opportunity. She's gonna bark. She's super loud. When she barks. Yeah, it was like she's just gearing up. Yeah. So and really, it's so important to talk about what products you're going to produce. We as researchers tend to produce these like research documents, right, and manuscripts that we submit to peer-reviewed journals, or these big like data reports, and that's not always useful for community partners. So, and we can't pretend to know what's going to be important for our community partners. We need our community partners to tell us what is important for us to produce. So there's a balance. Of course, we want to get research out there. We want to get it into our peer-reviewed journals because this work needs to get out there for sure. We also need to balance that out with products that are important for community. And then you have to conduct these regular check-ins to see how things are going, to make sure that your agreements are still working, that the roles are still the same, that things don't need to be changed. That's, I can't emphasize that enough. Next slide, please, or emphasize that enough. So once your team's tight, you have those relationships down. You're at the point where Lana and Ann, the two people in that slide before, are like, really digging into data and having fun. Then you can start documenting the strengths of the community. You can document the issue from that community perspective. You can refine your research questions together, and you can really support your partners in developing their hypotheses. And we as researchers provide the support for that, but we want to hear from our community about what those hypotheses would be. Again, we might want to reframe them in like research terms, but we want to hear from them about what those are. Next slide, please. Then you get to the point where you're analyzing your data. And this, like I said before, can be super, super tricky. I knew that I was in a really different place in my relationship with Anne, again, one of the people in that photo, and she's been in a couple of photos. And she and I worked together since 2005. And I knew I was in a different place with her when she started calling me saying, so-and-so sent me these data tables and I have no idea what they mean. And I was like, wow, we're really moving forward in our relationship. That was a big moment. I still remember it. And so when we're analyzing our data with our partners, we have to be super careful about like the technical aspects of that work and how we involve community in a way that actually makes sense. So the first thing we have to do is to share our plans for analyzing data with the partners, focusing on what we can answer and what we cannot answer with different analytic plans. We don't want to focus on the statistical aspects of the analytic plan unless the community partner wants you to. We have some pretty statistically savvy community partners, and maybe they do want you to, but we don't start with that, right? We start with where people are, and if where people is not there, then we focus in a different way. We want to discuss if the plan will meet the needs of the community and identify alternatives if needed. And again, we share findings with partners in a way that makes sense so that they can provide feedback and guidance on the next steps in the analysis. So maybe we found something that makes us ask another question and we need to run more analyses. That should be coming from our community partners, not just from us, right? That's that one bead. That's moving one bead over and involving community and analysis. And then once you get to the point where you feel like you're at the point where you have this analysis, it's where you want it to be, and then working with community to interpret those findings. Next slide, please. So you've done all that. You've analyzed your data together. Now you're writing up and sharing your findings. And there are lots of ways that this can happen. I really think it's super important to involve community in the writing up our findings, and not just the researchers write it up and those are the names on the publications. Our community partners need to have their names on those publications too, and to contribute to us telling those stories. Again, kind of going back to that quote that I shared at the beginning. So when we're sharing those findings, there are different ways that we can, things that we can document. We can document how our findings build the understanding of the issue, of course. we can also document how these historical experience relate to the problem or issue. Even if your data don't inform this aspect of the issue, I think it's something we always have to talk about. And you can pull from other areas of research that talk about historical trauma to embed the data within, but we have to make sure we're always acknowledging that as being related to some of the issues that we're addressing. We also want to make sure that, again, we're writing up our findings for both academic and community audiences, and that we're working with our partners to identify sometimes really creative ways to share findings with community. I've heard of people, I've never done this because I'm not that creative, but I've heard of people having having plays that embody the findings of a study, and that seems to, and having youth and, you know, conduct the play and perform in it. Super cool, right? Again, I'm not that creative, but that would be fun. Next slide, please. Can you imagine doing that for AIAN Faces, Sarah? How fun would that be? An AIAN Faces production.
Oh my goodness. we might need to recruit some more creative thinkers, I feel like.
We should, because I am not that. So how do you contextualize AIAN Faces data? And we'll show a few slides next. Next slide, please, to do this. And so these are two reports. I already talked about them. I had talked about the two groups who broke out, who were interested in this. And you'll see there are common names across each, but there are also different names. So the home and community native language and cultural experiences is on the left, and on the right, we have the native language and cultural experiences among children in classrooms and programs. So you'll see Michelle and I took the lead on both of these publications, both of these reports. And they start off very similarly. The introduction is pretty much the same. It's a little different. But once you get into the report, you'll see they're structured really differently. It's because it was being driven by the people within that group. And there were people in certain, like in the group that I led on the home and community native language and cultural experiences, especially given the data in that report. It was super important to contextualize those with a story. And so it was a little longer because we weren't just showing data, we were telling a story while sharing data. Next slide, please. And so again, this is from the at home and in the community report. Next slide, please. And within that focus, these are some of the data in the report. So native language is primary for only 6% of the families who participated in the study. So most of the American and Alaska Native children are in homes where English is the primary language. Next slide, please. And most American Indian and Alaska Native children's parents reported engaging in a variety of activities to support their child in learning a native language. Next slide, please. And we won't go into the details of that to save time, but what was important about that, and why I wanted to share those two pieces of data, because they're kind of juxtaposed a bit. There's very few children who are in homes where native language is primary, but most families are engaging in a lot of activities to support their children to learn their native language and to be engaged in their culture. So our group felt it was super important to tell the more nuanced story behind these data rather than stating simple facts. Next slide, please. It's easy to misinterpret simple facts like that. And so they really wanted to emphasize the importance of cultural practices and lifeways. Next slide, please. They wanted to emphasize the importance of native language in the face of rapid declines in native language fluency in many communities across the United States. Next slide, please. And then to talk about those policy and practice implications that I talked about earlier this morning. Next slide, please. And then we also included quotes from our community partners about what all of this means. And that's actually included in the report. And here's another quote from one of our other community partners. Tribal programs choose, and these are her words, tribal programs choose to participate in Region 11 Head Start programs because of the infusion of our cultures and languages that make our programs unique from non-tribal programs. And our parents want their children to learn about their native language and culture in an age-appropriate setting. This is where children begin to find their sense of pride in who they are as Native people and to honor and practice their culture and their language. Next slide, please. So that's it. It's back to Sara, but I want you to see that we ended with the words of one of our partners. And we always try to do that because of the power that that embodies, I think, and the perspective that is so, so important. So I hope that was helpful in kind of addressing like how you actually do this in practice, particularly with this data set. So thank you. Back to you, Sara.
Yeah, and I actually think we have until 12:30, I want to say. So if people have questions for Jessica, I only have just a few short slides after this. So if people have questions for Jessica, maybe now would be a good time to pause before I pivot just a little bit. You can pop them in the chat.
Yeah, and you can continue putting them in the chat, and yeah, we can stick around and answer them. So thanks, Sara.
Okay, I will get started then on my next little bit. So I mentioned this at the beginning of this little section of the workshop, but we are planning for this extension of AIAN FACES 2019. We are anxiously awaiting OMB approval. The plan is that parents and teachers will be asked to report about themselves and study children. Instruments will focus on capturing how families are doing, like I said, about 1.5 years into the pandemic. And we have been collaborating with workgroup members on updates to all of our measures with this sort of more specific focus on COVID in this new round of data collection. Some of the information we're collecting is not directly related to COVID and is there so that we have this sort of continuity and measurement across studies. We could look at change across time. So again, pending OMB approval, this will happen this fall and next spring. We will be returning to the same 22 programs that participated in 2019-2020. If they will have us, we hope that they will. We will start recontacting and re-recruiting them again as soon as we have OMB clearance. We will be doing all components of the study except for in-person data collection. So we won't be doing direct child assessments. We'll get information on children's development from their teachers and from their parents. And we won't be doing classroom observations, but we'll be doing all of the surveys and we'll be doing the teacher-child reports. And then I think I previewed this a little bit, but I wanted to talk about some of the different kinds of data resources that are available to you. So I'm going to just go through this table pretty quickly, I hope. So first we have study reports, and those are really, sometimes we call them data table sets or technical reports. They provide information from all aspects of the study. So the parent surveys, the direct child assessment data, the staff surveys. They have a slightly more detailed introduction to the study design and method. So usually we'll have 20-ish pages of introduction. But most of those reports, again, are just data tables. So you could go there to find the percentages or averages on a pretty broad range of topics that we cover in the study. We typically report those for Region 11 children overall, and then we'll usually have like a second column reporting most of this information for AIAN children only. For things that are about children and parents, it doesn't make as much sense to report Region 11 and all of Region 11 and AIAN children separately if you're talking about something that's at like the program level, right? Because they're all served in the same program. One of the second resource I'm going to tell you about are just the measures, with the exception of items and measures that are copyrighted and that we can't share. Those are part of the data documentation. So that's they're included as appendices to the user's manual. So you can go there to see the exact questions that were asked of study participants to help understand findings and how the data were collected. And those could also be a source for programs and researchers to use those items, right, for their own data collection. And then third, researchers, hopefully like some of the folks in this workshop, can apply to gain access to the restricted use data file in the afternoon, we'll talk a little bit more about the process for applying for the data. But ACF and the AIAN FACES 2015 Workgroup developed procedures informed by tribal best practices for data access and review to ensure proper use of the data, right? One of the things that's really highlighted by the first video that Jessica showed is it's possible to do harm even if you're not directly interacting with the participants in your study. And so the review and access processes are meant to be a safeguard against that kind of use. The data file contains de-identified information from the surveys and scores from the direct assessments. And so they're available to conduct analyses to answer your new research questions. And researchers and institutions of higher education or research organizations can apply to access those data. And then there are findings out as well from 2015. Everything is out, and we'll have things coming out increasingly from the 2019 data collection. So first we have webinars. We did a couple based on the 2019-2020 data this past December. Those are up on the OPRE website. We also developed study briefs that are shorter than that data table report I was talking about on the last slide. They sort of more tell a story, like Jessica was talking about with the two briefs that she was highlighting, and talk about a more specific topic with more context. Third, there are AIAN FACES snapshots where you can find, these are really like one pagers or a front and back with short text, a lot of figures to just get at key takeaway points. And then fourth, there may be slides available as a set of figures to accompany these other products. So one thing that OPRE does is they develop a slide deck of, they call them key indicators, to share with Office of Head Start. I think the goal is that those will eventually be made public. So that's just a slide deck with some of the same information you'd find in the technical report, but in graphic form. And these are just some AIAN FACES contacts. So Meryl Borofsky and Laura Horde are our project officers at OPRE. On the Mathematica side, please feel free to contact me or my colleague, Lisa Malone, and Jessica and Michelle can answer questions or point you in the right direction as well. So just a few more folks you can contact. And then that's actually my last sort of content slide. So I wanted to see if there are any questions before we break. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. I see that note about ideas for sharing findings, and also Jennifer noted the helpful, being helpful, and how that role of being helpful was important for her to get involved and accepted as she's conducted her work as well. So I think those are, thank you for sharing those. Yeah. And as I said, we are happy to connect with you more. And if you're interested in connecting with a community partner, we're happy to help facilitate those connections. And Nancy also has a question here. I think this is for you, Sarah.
I think so, although others at the Child and Family Data Archive should feel free to hop on. I don't think, so we're still like confirming the procedures for the 2019 data. Like I see some meeting invitations on my calendar about this. So I don't know, at least that right now, it's possible to sort of pre-apply for the 2019 data. I see Susan coming onto video again. I don't know if you had anything to add or that was just coincidental, but usually it's when they come out. You're muted.
I think we should check in. I'm not sure if Bianca is on right now, but certainly in the next session, let's check in with Bianca. I think that one thing that's a good question about the application process. One thing that we could think about if it's not clearly available, what I know about the application process, which I think we're talking about more later, is that there are things that people can start preparing even before they submit it. So if we don't have that, if it's going to be similar to the 2015 application process. Anyways, there are some resources we can share for people to start preparing their application, even if the link isn't up yet. So let's make sure to return to this topic in the next session with Bianca.
That would be great. I think there are people who are going to be really interested and in that, and there are probably a lot of, as you were saying, Susan, a lot of things people could do to be prepared for that before that actual release date comes out, so that, you know, it comes out and they have a lot of things already ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be pretty similar, if not the same. So I think that it's the kind of thing that you could look at the 2015 application materials and get all your stuff together and hit send, you know, when they're released, if you have to wait until then. But it sounds like we'll have a little more to say in the afternoon. So.
Are we going to talk in the afternoon? I should know this, but are we going to talk in the afternoon about the process beyond just the application, like you put in the application and what happens next? Because within the AIAN FACES data committee review, like, do we have a space for talking about that? Because that has changed over time, even with the 2015 process, as we've kind of refined it, as we've moved along, as you know, Sarah. I'm not sure if that's something that we want to talk about or no.
I think there'll be space for that. I don't know if we've talked about changes, and you can take a look at the slides and see if they sort of get at what you're talking about. But also, I think it would be interesting. Like, I know that there are a couple of people on this call who've used the data as secondary users, and so to talk about that experience, right, I think might be informative. Actually, kind of embarrassed I didn't think of this before just now, but I'm sure there are people on this call who might want to apply for the data and haven't yet, and they might be interested to hear about your experiences and what you would do the same or differently or something like that. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's part of how we changed the process to say, wait a second, I just applied for it, and there's some things we can do to improve that process. So
yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions popping up yet?
Well, I think it's time for our break then, and we can reconvene at 1 o'clock Eastern. I don't know if anyone, Chelsea, I see you nodding. Again, I don't want to call people out, but if there are any ICPSR type announcements or anything, if that's sufficient.
That's sufficient. This room will still be live, so you can feel free to just stay here and turn your video off or whatever you want to do, or you can rejoin at 1. So.
See you in a bit, guys.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.